Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. I've got here in front of me the universal milling attachment for my K&T horizontal mill. This was on the machine when I bought it, but I have no idea if it's actually in working condition or not. I've tried to turn the spindle by hand and it doesn't turn, so I don't know if that's because it's gummed up with old grease or if there's something inside of it that's broken. I had seen a while ago that there are a couple of cracks in the drive gear housing. I don't think they're in that bad of a spot. I should be able to do a braze repair on them, and I think they'll be fine. I didn't have a parts manual when I took this apart. I've since found one, so I'll try to explain what some of the names of these pieces are as we go. Of course, that means that I may be jumping around between this part and that part in order to figure out just how I can take this apart without breaking anything, but still keeping track of all the pieces. So I'm just going to get started here by trying to find all the different grease zerks and unscrew them just in case I need to fill any of these holes with some penetrating oil or some other kind of solvent to help me loosen things up. I have the feeling I can take this whole spindle head off in one chunk. I don't think there's much holding this on to the rest of it. I'm going to loosen up the mounting bolts on all of this just to get a better feel of how this might be held together. I want to clean out the slots in these 3 screws so I can remove them and see if this spindle head cap will come off fairly easily to get a picture of what might be underneath it. That came off pretty easy, and as expected, it is packed full of hardened grease, probably 80 years worth. Well, underneath that cap is a nut. It looks like a spanner nut. And there might be at least 1, maybe 2 grub screws in the side of it. Well, the hole for the pin spanner is pretty well mangled, so I imagine someone's been in here before and has chewed it up with a punch. So I'm just trying to tap on here with a brass hammer to see if I can't get it to move a little bit. Well, I'm not having any luck getting it to move without moving the spindle, which is, I guess, partly a good thing that the spindle does move. But I can't get it to budge off of the threads. So I think what I'm going to do is move on to something else, and I'll come back to this. Well, here's more evidence that someone was in here and they took it apart wrong. These grub screws here that I'm removing hold in this brass grease retaining ring that goes around the spindle, but you can see a couple of other places where it's busted, and I have the feeling that somebody whacked on the back of the spindle with a hammer, not knowing that they needed to remove those first, and it busted out the casting. Looks like they ended up drilling those holes again and tapping them to hold that grease retaining ring. Well, I can't figure out anything else that might be holding this spindle onto the swivel other than these 4 mounting nuts. I'm pretty confident that if I take these off, I should be able to pull the spindle right off.
Looks like it.
Well, I was happy that that came off pretty easy, and unsurprisingly, it is packed full of nasty, dried, old grease. Well, going a little bit out of order, I want to look at disassembling this swivel.
Yep.
There's this big nut on the back of it, and my largest adjustable wrench is too small. And unfortunately, I'm a little bit too impatient to wait to get a bigger wrench or to try and make one. So I pulled out an old pipe wrench. And I know you're all going to cringe when you see this, but it is what it is. I will clean this nut up before it goes back on, because using this pipe wrench did mar up the sides of the nut, but I did get it off, and that's what I wanted to do tonight. Well, removing that nut really didn't do me any good, because I need to take this whole swivel off of the drive bracket in order to pull that out anyway. So I guess I could have waited, which in hindsight would have been better, of course, but like I said, I'm a bit impatient. I'm pretty sure here too that if I remove these 4 mounting nuts, that this swivel will come straight off of the drive bracket. If this is constructed the way I suspect, I should be able to just lift straight up on this. Well, it looks like I can rotate these studs around and drop them through a hole in the back to remove them from this bracket. It looks like I can do the same with the swivel itself. These studs will rotate around and come out the bottom here through a hole. Well, these last two, for whatever reason, are being difficult to get out of here. At this point, I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's the length of the studs. Do they come out a different way? Do I need to take something else apart first? So I'm going to leave them inside the swivel here for a little bit. There's a snap ring here on top of this bevel gear, and I'm hoping that if I remove that, I can pull that gear off. and packed full of more grease. Of course, I suppose I would rather it packed full of grease than dry, but that's one hefty component.
Broken
That must have
teeth.
been expensive. Looks like there's bearings in either end. Yeah, I think this is going to take a little time and effort to clean out. It is just really packed in here, and it's crusty and dry, and I think it's stained some of the internal finishes, which I don't think is too much of a problem. With this a little more clean now, I can see that there's a notch or a little rounded part in that hole for the studs to fit through. So now I see how they come out.
There's a little indent right there.
There's a plug here on the end of the swivel, and it looks like there was a hole tapped into it for maybe a grease zerk. I don't think that's original, but the screw that was in here, the slot has been pretty well mangled, so I'm just using my Dremel with a cutoff wheel to make a new slot and see if I can't use a screwdriver on it. With a freshly cut slot in that screw, I'm using this right-angled ratcheting screwdriver I have to see if I can't remove it from its tapped hole. I'm not exactly sure why someone would have put that in there. On the parts diagram that I've since found, there is no reference to a tapped hole here. I'm pretty sure that plug is going to come out. I think it's a friction fit in there. So I've got this piece of brass rod that I'm trying to see if I can't get it to move a little bit. I think it is. So we'll just keep hitting it here until it comes out. It's pretty thick, so I'm not sure why this hole would have been in here. There's no reason to put grease in this part of the swivel. I'm kind of wondering if this was over-greased at one point and they drilled that hole in order to relieve pressure. And I think now I can tap on that stud where I took that big nut off of and drive this gear support out of the swivel housing.
Piece. Key. Up inside there.
I think this is as far as I can take this swivel apart. It looks like there is a needle bearing up inside of that protrusion, but I don't see an easy way that I can remove that. So it looks like it's going to be okay, so I'm just going to leave it for now. I can remove the swivel support bracket by loosening the stud and just pulling it straight up off of that spline shaft. Bouncing around again, there's this retaining plate that's mounted to the drive gear housing with 5 screws. I want to take it off now and see what it exposes. Well, there's this other piece underneath it that looks like it could come off this way, but I'm not going to force it. It might be easier to take a look at this from the other side. I know there's another plate on the back of this that can come off. There's 5 screws here that attach this piece on the back of the housing, and you can see underneath it, it's hard from this camera angle, that a little sliver of the drive gear is exposed underneath. With those 5 screws out, I can push this spline shaft here through, grab a hold of that plate, and you can see the gear underneath there, and yeah, this spline shaft goes right through the middle of that gear. With that shaft out of the way, I can see that there is a snap ring that looks like it might be holding that gear onto this housing. Well, I'll find that later. It didn't go very far. I can't see anything else that might be holding that gear in place. I think I'm safe to go ahead and give it a couple of love taps, and yeah, that's tapping it right out of the housing, and that lets me remove this other bracket and this oil slinger. I need to make sure I get these oriented right. I'm glad I've got these videos because, quite frankly, I lose track of how these things sometimes go together, and I will often replay these videos so I can see how I took it apart so I know how to put it back together. Well, the only thing that's left in this piece is this big roller bearing, and I'll try to get the numbers off of it, but for now, I'm not removing any bearings until I am sure that I can find replacements. I want to remove this shaft from this piece so I can check the bearing that's underneath it for any wear, but I'm having a hard time seeing what's holding it in place. It looks like there's another snap ring down here that's holding the bearing into this cap. I'm sure I'd be better served if I had a big parts washer to put these in, but I don't. I've got a small one, but the compound that's in it is just dirty, and I need to empty it, and I need to come up with a different solution for washing parts in it, because what I have now just isn't working. If I can get a pick or something underneath one part of this snap ring, I might be able to get it out. Well, I managed to get a screwdriver underneath one end of it, and that was all I needed to be able to work it out the rest of the way. Well, I don't see anything else that's holding this on except maybe friction. So I think I will try to see if I can't just tap this the rest of the way off. Well, the bearing here on the end of the shaft sounds horrible, so that's definitely one that's likely going to need to be replaced.
Just such junk.
Well, moving back now to the swivel support bracket, I want to get this shaft out of here. There is a lock nut and a lock washer on the back of this thing. But before I can start to remove the lock nut, I have to bend back the tab on the washer that fits into the slot on the nut. This is, I presume, done in order to set a preload. Well, I'm confident that this is not going to budge easily, so I'll clean it off here a little bit, but I think I'm going to go ahead and put this in the vise and put a punch and a hammer into the notches on that nut. I don't have a drive that would spin this off very easily, so we'll do it old school.
Oh my. Whew.
There are 6 nuts that are mounted on some studs in the support bracket that retain this plate, which I think is a bearing retainer. Now the parts diagram I found shows these as Allen head screws, so it must have been a later revision. With those removed from the studs, that should be all that's holding this bearing into the bracket. My parts diagram differs again to this component, as there's another, looks like some kind of an oil slinger and a washer on this end of the bearing.
Made in USA.
Well, again, I think that's as far as I'm going to disassemble this, because I'd have to remove the bearing to go any further. And unless I know I can get a new bearing relatively inexpensively, I'm not going to take it off and risk damaging it.
Because I can only imagine what it's going to take to get that off of there.
Well, I didn't catch it on camera, but I got this nut loose. I ended up taking the drive dogs that are on the face of the spindle and putting them in the bench vise, and then took a pipe wrench to this nut after applying a good bit of heat from some MAP gas. I think at this point there's nothing else holding the spindle in, so I should be able to tap it out from the top of the housing. Does seem to be getting held up right about here, and I'm not sure why. I'm looking for any evidence of taper pins or cross pins in that bevel gear, and I don't see anything. That bevel gear does move. It does slide on that shaft, and I'm not seeing any evidence of snap rings or circlips here. I'm not sure what's holding up this spindle right now. Oh, maybe there's something gumming up here, so I'll spray a little PB blaster on here just as a lubricant more than anything else. Maybe there's a burr or something on this that I missed. I decided to reseat this bearing onto the shaft just to see if there was any kind of a snap ring, something that I missed. And when I looked at the other side of the bearing, I saw one of those wedged keys. This is similar to the wedged key
One of those
that was in the table bearings. I don't want to lose this thing, that's for sure, but I'm pretty confident that's what was keeping that bearing from sliding off the end of the shaft. That spindle comes out pretty easy now that that key is out of the way. I am going to leave this bearing attached here, again, until I can find out if I should or can replace them.
Well, let's hope we can save that one.
Well, with the bearings now out, I should be able to poke this bevel gear up and take it out of the large opening. And so far, all of these gears look like they're in remarkably good shape, so I'm pretty excited about that. Well, that's it for the disassembly and for this video. I still have a little bit more work to do in getting this all cleaned up. I've done some preliminary research on some new bearings, and they're going to be pretty expensive, well over $500. So if you have it in your heart to want to donate to the cause, there's some links down in the description where you can donate through either PayPal or Patreon or something like that. As always, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And if you're not a subscriber, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button. All of those things help YouTube know that you like this content. And if you liked it, it might recommend it to somebody else that does like this kind of stuff too. So until we get back to this, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.